Ever dreamt of scaling GraphQL like a tech giant?
Mm-hmm.
Well, today we're going to dive deep into PayPal's journey,
Okay.
using one of their very own engineers' Medium articles as our guide.
That's good.
We'll uncover how they went from just 3 products using GraphQL to a whopping 52.
Wow.
And we'll learn from their wins, their challenges.
Right.
And hopefully you'll walk away with some golden nuggets that you can apply to your own work.
Yeah, what I find really interesting about PayPal's story is how much they emphasize the human side of scaling.
Right.
Like, it's not just about throwing more servers at a problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the people
Yeah,
and taking your team along on that journey with you.
it's so true. And they had a huge growth spurt to manage.
Yeah.
The article mentions they went from 3 to 52 products using GraphQL in just 2 years.
Yeah, that's a lot of change really fast.
That's a lot of change.
Yeah.
So their insights are really valuable for anyone listening.
Definitely. And you know what's funny is they initially thought GraphQL everywhere,
Oh.
but they quickly realized that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah.
It's about choosing the right tool for the job.
So it's not a magic solution then.
Right.
Where'd PayPal find GraphQL to be the most effective?
They discovered that it really shines at the edge of their technology stack,
Yeah.
working alongside REST APIs,
Interesting.
not necessarily replacing them entirely.
Oh, okay.
So think of it this way. Instead of ripping out your entire infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
you can strategically layer in GraphQL where it makes the most sense.
That's a huge takeaway.
It is.
You don't have to choose one or the other.
Right.
You can be a powerful combination.
Yeah, exactly.
But I know you're probably thinking, okay, that's great, but how do they actually pull this off?
Right.
They must have had some sort of master plan.
They did. And it all starts with a strong foundation.
Okay.
Standards, tooling, training.
Mm-hmm.
These aren't just buzzwords. They're the key pillars to their success.
So no move fast and break things mentality here.
Well,
Okay.
they do value speed and agility. But they also recognize that when you're dealing with systems as critical as PayPal's,
Yeah,
you need to be structured and you need to be deliberate in your approach.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So did they build all their GraphQL tools in-house, or did they rely on existing solutions?
So they were actually really smart about it.
Okay.
They leaned heavily on open source,
Okay.
especially Apollo's libraries and tools.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't just stop there.
Okay.
They also built their own custom tools
Oh, wow.
and processes that were specifically tailored to their needs.
So a bit of both.
Yeah,
Using the best of what's already out there and innovating for their unique context.
exactly.
Now let's talk about tooling.
Sure.
They mention they use tools not just for basic monitoring, just making sure things aren't on fire,
Right.
but for something much more in-depth.
Yeah, so PayPal realized early on that having tools isn't enough.
Okay.
You need to know how to use them strategically
Oh,
to gain insights into how developers are actually using GraphQL.
not just that they're using it, but how.
Exactly.
Wow.
And this is really important because it allowed them to proactively identify
Okay.
and address potential issues before they became major headaches.
So being able to spot a bottleneck or a design flaw just by analyzing how developers are using GraphQL,
Exactly.
that's pretty powerful.
It is.
That's like having X-ray vision into your code base.
Right.
Now, even with all this planning and powerful tooling, I imagine they still faced some hurdles,
Oh, for sure.
especially given how quickly they were growing.
Right.
And the article hints that they struggled to create a unified GraphQL graph.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
This is where their fast-paced development culture became a bit of a double-edged sword.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, on one hand, it allowed them to be incredibly agile and responsive,
Mm-hmm.
but that same speed made it tricky to keep everyone on the same page when it came to GraphQL.
So it's like trying to build a car while it's already speeding down the highway.
That's a great analogy.
That's the challenge of trying to wrangle all those teams and all those GraphQL APIs into one unified graph.
Yeah, and it's a common challenge.
So how did they approach it? Did they find a way to make that car work at top speed?
They tried a couple different approaches.
Okay.
Initially, they experimented with schema stitching.
Theme.
Yeah, so you basically use a gateway to combine multiple GraphQL schemas from all your different APIs
Okay.
into one unified schema.
So it's like stitching together Frankenstein's monster of schemas.
Kind of.
Sure. Did it work?
It had its pros and cons.
Okay, such as?
Managing the relationships between all the different types across those stitched schemas.
Okay.
got really complex really quickly.
Right, because now you've got all these different parts that are talking to each other.
Exactly. And then you have to make sure that subqueries are executed correctly across all those different APIs.
Oh, boy.
It's a lot.
So stitching the schemas together wasn't as simple as they'd hoped.
Pretty much.
Did they find any other solutions that worked better?
So they also looked into Apollo Federation,
Okay.
which offers a more declarative way of composing a unified graph from different services.
And is that the solution? Did that work out for them?
It's a little too early to say for sure.
Okay.
The article suggests that they're still working through it.
So they're still trying to wrangle that unified graph.
It's a work in progress for sure.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces are constantly changing.
Exactly.
So even with the best tools and technologies, sometimes there are no easy answers.
Right.
It really is about continuous iteration and improvement.
Absolutely.
Speaking of progress, how did PayPal measure the success of adopting GraphQL?
That's a great question.
Especially when it comes to those harder to measure things like developer experience.
Yeah, it's something a lot of companies struggle with.
Right.
How do you quantify something like developer happiness?
Exactly. You can't just say, oh, look, developers are 20% happier now that they're using GraphQL.
Right, it's not that simple.
So what did they do?
They did gather feedback from their developers,
Okay.
but they also knew they needed more objective measures.
Makes sense.
The article talks about how they're still figuring out
Okay.
how to measure those less tangible benefits of GraphQL.
So they know it's making a difference, but putting an exact number on it,
Yeah.
that's the tricky part.
It is.
So what kind of metrics are they looking at?
Yeah, it's like trying to measure how much creativity is worth.
Right.
You know, it's valuable, but how do you put a dollar amount on that?
Exactly. And that's the challenge they're facing.
So what did they find? Were they able to measure it?
Well, even without those perfect metrics, it's clear that PayPal sees the value in what they're doing. They're not just focused on things like API response times or error rates.
Right, because those are more like
Yeah.
technical benchmarks.
Exactly. They're important, but PayPal is trying to dig deeper.
Okay.
They want to understand how GraphQL is impacting their developer workflow.
So are developers able to reuse more code? Are there fewer bugs? Those are the kinds of questions they're asking.
Because ultimately, those things do have an impact on the bottom line.
Right. Happier, more productive developers lead to better products.
Exactly, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool that they're so open about sharing their experiences,
Yeah,
both the good and the bad.
it's refreshing.
It is, because a lot of companies only want to talk about their successes.
Right.
But PayPal is out there saying, hey, we're still figuring this out too. Here's what we've learned so far,
Yeah.
and hopefully it helps you on your journey.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into PayPal and GraphQL, what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I think the biggest thing is that scaling GraphQL is a journey.
Okay.
It's not a destination.
Not a one and done kind of thing.
Right. It's about constantly learning, iterating, and adapting.
So you're always moving forward.
Exactly. And what PayPal shows us is that it's not just a technical challenge.
Okay.
It's also a cultural challenge.
Interesting.
It's about fostering collaboration, experimenting, and never underestimating the human element.
So it's like you're building a GraphQL-powered rocket ship.
I like that.
But you also need to make sure your team has the spacesuits, the training,
Yes.
and the shared excitement to launch it into the future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
There you have it, a glimpse into how a tech giant tackled GraphQL at scale.
Yep.
We hope you found this deep dive insightful, and we hope it inspires you to explore how GraphQL can empower your own organization.
Absolutely.
Until next time, happy coding.